Hi, everybody. This is Bergen Sullivan with JCSI. I'm here with Chris Bell for another interview in our Talent Chronicle series. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Virgin. I'm really looking forward to it.
So, you've been an internationally experienced talent acquisition leader for over 20 years in the technology sector, starting on the agency side and eventually moving to in house to lead talent acquisition teams at leading software companies. Do you want to give us a quick background of how you got into talent acquisition and kind of how you led up to where you are today in your career?
Sure. Yeah, talent acquisition. So for me, it did start on the agency days, and that was back in late 1999, early 2000, and I saw an article. It said IT recruiter. I wasn't familiar with recruiting the industry, and but I was interested in IT, and so I faxed in a resume, and that's we were faxing at that time, and I got a call back, and met with some fabulous people, and long story short, I ended up taking a chance on this agency recruiter role. I was coming from technical support, and I felt like, this is an opportunity. One, it didn't pay too bad, and two, it allowed me to actually learn about different technologies. Right at that time, I was, doing a lot of web support and just some basic technical support at the time. And I mean, literally, it was you called me up, have you rebooted? And the call was over. So that wasn't too exciting. So I wanted something different, and I answered that article and ended up working at Comforce for about 4 years.
Okay, awesome. So you've mentioned having experience with relationship-based recruiting. So what is relationship-based recruiting to you, and why do you think it is so important in talent acquisition?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So early on in my days at Comforce, for me, the thing that I felt like set me apart, because those were the days when the early bird got the worm. You come into the office early, you got new requisitions, and you're competing with 5 to 6 other agencies trying to find the same talent and present them to the same job, and that was super competitive. And so when you think about getting up early and doing that year after year, that can get pretty taxing. So how do you do that in a better way? And for me, it was really focusing on the people that I was getting hired into these roles. So how did I go about continuing that relationship and finding them the next job? And so from that point on, I really start focusing on the relationship with the talent, because if I had the relationship, they would want to be represented by me, regardless of the time of the day that I reached out to them, right? Or they may even call me up and say, hey, I heard about this job. Do you have access to it? Right. And so really building those relationships, create the foundation that set in motion this whole recruiting-based relationship theory that I have, and the whole philosophy of recruiting that really I think is the best way to recruit, to be quite honest. So today, if we fast forward to today, what does that mean? That means that my space today in exec recruiting, I'm focused on making sure that my leaders inside of the organization are building relationships with talent ahead of time, right? And so really the relationship at the end of the day will win the talent war. Any company could be flying high with the wind underneath their wings right now, and it takes one bad piece of press to kind of take that air from underneath the wings. But when you think about that, so is your company more attractive or less attractive when that happens? They're probably going to be less attractive. It's going to be harder to get talent. But what wins is if you already have relationships, right? So those relationships, they transcend the bad news. And so really you get to this place to where, wow, okay, hey, John, you probably heard that press. Let's talk about it, right? You already have a door open. You already have that relationship, and you can still make hires even in that type of with that negative air. So
Okay, and when you are going out and making those relationships, what type of
yeah,
outreach do you think is the best and the most effective way to reach them and to build that relationship?
yeah, no, that's a great question. I think everyone, today, I think 9 out of 10 recruiters are sending in emails. And for me, it is good old fashioned picking up the phone, finding contact information, reaching out directly to prospects. And I think my last resort would probably be emails. And that's after I've already leveraged people who may know the person to get in contact with them. But I think, most importantly, I think it's about honest dialogue too, right? So I always talk about my intent, what I'm doing. It's not about a job today. It's about getting to know you and what you want to do, and how I can support you in that, and maybe even introduce you to some people inside of my network at my company that you can kind of share that vision too. And so maybe we can end up at the end of the day, what we end up doing, we end up either creating a role for someone built around that person, leveraging the strengths that they can bring to the organization, or we end up leveraging that relationship into succession planning, or it's one of those things to where sometimes you have incumbents who are not performing. And so we really have to coach leaders on making that hard decision to really trust in that relationship that you've been building and that person we've been talking to over the last year, and sliding them into the role to experience exponential growth, or continue with this single digit year over year incremental growth. So it's really, sometimes it's about mitigating the risk in their mind as well to get them to make those hard decisions. But really engaging talent, I think it could take many forms.
Okay. And what type of messaging do you think works best, let's say, for a cold prospect, so someone that don't have a relationship with yet? What type of language do you say, or would you say that you use to be successful, to first get your foot in the door with that relationship?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a particular language, because I think every situation is quite different. I'll give you an example. There was one situation. There was a guy I was trying to track down for a very long time. I won't say names, but he was over a very iconic brand from a marketing perspective, a brand that literally, I mean, when you think about hyperscale and what they were able to do in the matter of a few years and become number one in the market, it was pretty phenomenal. So not only did the brand stock shoot up, that person's stock shot up as well. And so he was someone I was trying to recruit for a while, and I read, all of his articles that he had been interviewed in. I did the research, watched all of the videos, and I think the first conversation I had with him on the phone was it wasn't about the job. I don't think I talked about the job until the second or third conversation that I was trying to recruit him into. But at that time, it really was about something he said about the founder and his first day on the job. And so that initial conversation, I think I started out with just saying, hey, you know what? I watched this video of you, and I'm curious, what was the outcome of this? Because you didn't never finish the story. And he just bust out laughing, and from there, we had an instant rapport, and the conversation just went organically. And so I think really when you think about approaching someone, you can never templatize what you're trying to do with any one individual, because we're human and we're all different, right? So I think really at the end of the day, it's about being your authentic self and being honest about your intentions. And that's how I try to play any situation that I'm with. I'll pick up the phone and say, hey, pardon the interruption, me calling you directly here, right? If I'm emailing them at their work, I say, hey, pardon the interruption, me reaching you at work or whatever, right? I tried you at this number and this number and this number, couldn't get a hold of you, so I really needed to talk to you, so I'm just giving you a call, right? So I mean, I'm just really direct with people when it comes to that, and because at the end of the day, what I want them to feel is I want them to feel like they can trust me at the end of the conversation. And so when we think about the speed to trust, what does it take? Can you get trust in one conversation? I don't know. It really depends. But I think you can get to a level of trust, right? And sometimes that takes showing some vulnerability, and being authentic is being vulnerable, right? And so when you can do that, you can build that trust relationship a lot quicker. And people don't think that you're just trying to sell them a bag of goods or fit them into a round circle, when really at the end of the day, we should be thinking about what does this person want to do, and then how do we align it to our mission? And sometimes it's not going to align, right? And so you just say, hey, let's stay in touch, right? And let's keep the conversation going, and I just want to get to know you. And so that's kind of how I approach everything when I think about relationship building.
Okay, so that personalization's definitely key there.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
And in terms of building that relationship, what would you say is the appropriate follow-up process for someone that's not answering you? So you don't want to annoy them, but you don't want to let them fall through the cracks. What would you say is some good advice on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's one of those do as I say, not as I do when I talk to my team. I'm like, hey, so one of the things, and my teams who have worked for me in the past, they know that I'm a big believer that the pursuit has been lost, meaning that we give up too easy, right? We send an email, we forget about it, we never follow back up. So for me, it's really about getting to yes, but when we hear the no, no is no, right? But then we got to take the no as not right now as well. So I think there's the opportunity. There's a lot of people who think that you're just another recruiter, right? So how do you differentiate yourself from being just another recruiter and saying, hey, you know what, my intent is, my intention is to do what's best for you, right? I'm not trying to just fill a job, right? And so, how can you get to that place to where they understand that quickly? And sometimes you don't get the opportunity, right? Because people just are unresponsive, and all of your connections that you don't have a direct connection. There's no way for you. And so, I think for me, if I was, what I tell my team is, you don't stop until you hear a no. Keep going, right? You follow up. We use email tracking software and things like that as well. And so when you think about what that does, it gives us the signal. So if someone hasn't responded to my email in the last week, but they read it 4 times. It's like, there's some curiosity there. So based on the signals that I'm seeing that they read it 4 times, from there, I know how to follow up next. I can follow up maybe with more context about why I'm trying to reach them. Or I can follow and say, or I can just call them and say, hey, I've been trying to reach you. Not sure if you saw my email. I'm sure they saw my email. Right. But, not sure if you saw my email. But I think really those are some of the trick of the trades, right? We do that and we follow up, and it becomes, you take it from kind of a cold call to a semi lukewarm call, because they've seen your email, they know your name, they know what you're calling about. It's not like it's just complete blind at that point. So,
Okay,
or complete
that
cold.
makes sense. Right.
Yeah.
And in your experience, how would you say relationship-based recruiting has helped to build a stronger team? And also, how has it affected different KPIs, maybe such as turnover rate, or employee satisfaction, and sort of the longevity of them at the jobs that you're placing them at?
Yeah, that's okay. That's a big question. I'll start with the first part, in terms of how does it affect the team. So with the team, I think what you'll find when you have this relation-based recruiting model, and the way you can roll it out, you create a more collaborative environment for your team to actually work together. So typically what you're doing, I mean, it's if you think about it this way, the typical recruiter waits to respond, right? They are looking for the signals from the HR business partner or the leader to say, hey, I have an opening, and I need to open a rec. And it's all react, 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 right? So let's take that same leader who doesn't have the opening today, but that situation, say that scenario happens 6 months from now that I just described, but this leader exists, they have headcount that's opening up all the time. Wouldn't it behoove you as your team to point your team in that direction of those type of profiles where the team is collaborating and everybody's coming together to surface these prospects ahead of time and to get to know them, and making sure that we are getting the business involved with that? So when we think about, the team, it really becomes kind of a working unit. When we think about goals, the goals become a team goal. So we're not talking about, everybody needs to make, 15 hires a month or whatever. It's, our team goal is going to be, 50 hires a month or whatever it may be. And so the team looks at opportunities to make the team better. Now, when you think about the KPIs and the metrics and the retention and all of those things, the core KPI that you're looking for inside of relationship-based recruiting is engagement. So the single point of failure in relationship-based recruiting is our leaders not engaging. So if our leaders are not engaging ahead of time, there's no way we can be proactive. There's no way that we can build a relationship. It just fails, right? The recruiters can build it, but still we need the business to build those relationships so we can actually move the dial on their hiring ahead of time and so on. So if they're not engaging, it doesn't work. So what we really try to do is think about how do we measure engagement? So how do we provide a scorecard? I like to call it a 180 kind of view. So it's not them looking at us, it's us looking at them and saying, hey, based on the last quarter, it looks like, such and such is yellow, this person's green, so your organization overall is doing well, right? But we need more engagement from these leaders or whatever it may be, right? Because we know that engagement is going to get us to a place to where, one, biases are being torn down because they're seeing diverse talent, they're meeting them and they're building relationships with them. They're going to be more comfortable. They're going to actually think outside of their homogeneous networks that they grew up with and went to school with and think about, now I have this talent that's been infused into my network. Now, how do I think about actually considering them for roles? When openings happening, now I consider them. So it becomes, engagement becomes such an important key because that engagement leads to the relationship building, and then that ultimately leads to the hiring. In terms of retention, you cannot be what you cannot see, right? So when we think about it at the exec level, and that's where my focus is, I'm bringing diverse talent in at the top. My job is literally to change the face of the company, right? Any company that I'm in. At Microsoft, before I left, 75 to 80% of the hires were coming through the relationship-based proactive recruiting model at the executive level. That's huge, meaning that we've known all of these people that we were going to hire before we hired them, and we knew that we wanted to hire them, but it was just about finding the right opportunity inside of the organization. So when we think about retention, you cannot be what you cannot see. When we think about any type of hemorrhaging that's happening down below where we're losing talent, underrepresented minority talent, bringing diversity in at the top gives targets that they can aspire to. So it definitely increases retention as well.
Okay.
Right? So with that concerted focus.
Sure. And sort of backtracking a little, you mentioned, being proactive.
Yeah.
Could you define and maybe touch on a little bit a proactive recruiting model and kind of how you used it and sort of what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, really, when we think about relationship-based recruiting and proactive, they're almost one and the same. They're right there. Basically, relationship-based recruiting is a proactive recruiting model. So you can have proactive recruiting models when you actually go to conferences and you decide that, what, I'm going to go to the conference and I'm actually going to make hires ahead of time, right? I may not have needs today, but I'm going to go to this conference. We're going to meet great people. We're going to do some interviews and we're going to hire them and we're going to figure out what to do with them later. That's a proactive recruiting approach, right? That doesn't have anything to do with a relationship, right? Relationship-based recruiting is just one of the many proactive recruiting approaches. Another proactive recruiting approach, literally for people that you've heard of in the industry that are great, why don't you just create an offer letter and give them the offer letter? You know what typically happens? They're like, is this for real? And then eventually they're like, well, I wouldn't, this is a great offer, but I couldn't come work with you out meeting people. Next thing you know, they're interviewing. Right. So those are proactive recruiting approaches. There's a lot of different approaches that we can employ out there. And my job is to really make the business really think about how we can be leaning forward versus leaning back and waiting for stuff to happen to us.
Yeah. Okay. I like that idea about the offer letter right off the bat.
Yeah.
It's aggressive.
They're great. If they're great, why are you beating around the bush. I was
Right.
talking to a colleague at Amazon, and we were talking about, proactive recruiting models. And it was interesting because I said, hey, I ended up, you know, delivering over after 3 weeks of just doing some sourcing, like, 6 great diverse UIM leaders for the business. And she was like, did you guys hire them? And I was like, no, well, we're just going to build the relationships over time and find a place. She was like, why don't you just hire them? And I'm like, and this is the funny thing. Amazon has those type of top pockets to where they can do that. But really, at the end of the day, there's a lot of great talent out there. And if you're doing your work and you're figuring out where great talent is, why not just hire them? Why do you beat around the bush and try to figure out, is there an actual role where they're going to add value, blah, 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 when you know they're going to add value? I have another buddy, he just went to Facebook and they all made him a great offer. And you know what he's doing for the year? He's just sitting there and figuring out what he's going to do. He's shadowing some people, he's figuring out what problems they have, and he has a year to figure out what problems he wants to solve there. So, I mean, that's a proactive recruiting approach that will yield huge dividends over time, right? They got a great talent. Um, he's just sitting back, looking at all of the different impact that he can make. And then after a year, he's going to have a plan on the stuff that he wants to work on. More companies need to do that because that's really proactive. That's a proactive approach to get great talent in. And how tight this market is today, you got to think out of the box because traditional methods are not going to get you there. So,
Right. I love
yeah.
that. And would you have any advice for talent acquisition professionals that are just starting out or anyone in an entry level HR role or anything like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great question. And I think, gosh, what would I offer someone in that position? Again, not to be over analytical on that, but it really depends on what they want to do, depending on what I would tell them. But this is the one general thing that I would say is that regardless of what you do, whatever it is, whoever your customer is, and for us, I really feel like our customers, we have two customers. When you are in-house, you have your business that's a customer, but you also have all of the prospects out there that are customers as well, right? Not to mention they're customers of your company, right? And so I think putting them at the center of everything that you do, and when you think about any type of experience that you want to build, you have to always start with the end result in mind. And I'm sure many of you have heard this, but really think about the experience that you want to deliver, right? The experience that you want to deliver. And this goes in life too, how you want to show up, the perception that you want to give off. And then what is it going to take to stand those things up? So when anybody's thinking about standing up function or standing up anything, it's always about creating the experience, the vision. How would this thing interact? What will it do? What kind of value will it provide? What are the interdependencies that depend on it? And so on. And then figure out, okay, we got that experience. Now this is what it's going to take to stand it up. For the most time, what we try to do, we go in the different environments and we have an experience in mind, but we end up letting the tools and the HR technology dictate what we have to do. And it severely compromises our initial vision and what we were trying to do. So I would just always say, keep that customer at center and really think about the experience that you're trying to provide in any service or experience that you're delivering. And think about how you stand that up and try to stay as true to that as possible. So that would be my advice.
Okay, that's great. And was there anything else that you'd like to share? Anything we didn't touch upon that you'd like to kind of close out with?
No, I really appreciate just the opportunity to do this. I'm happy to take additional questions from anyone. So anyone can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. I'm very I communicate a lot through that tool. And so yeah, if there's any other questions, anybody want to follow up, they can feel free to reach out to me.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for joining us in another episode of our Talent Chronicles series.
Thank you for having me.